Do you love me? The alien woman's answer shook him to the core. The hum of the Otis was a constant companion, a deep thrumming vibration. That settled into Ethan Voss's bones like an old song. He hadn't quite learned the words till he leaned back in his chair. Fingers drumming against the armrest, waiting for the inevitable moment when someone, probably the captain, would barge in and tell him he had been volunteered for something against his will again. The door to his quarters hissed open, and in walked Commander Rave, looking far too pleased with himself. Ethan sighed. Just tell me if it involves food rations or waste disposal. I'm launching myself out of the airlock. You way too dramatic for a scientist, Rave said, tossing a data pad onto Ethan's table. Congratulations. You're our new xenobiology liaison to the Nari delegation. Ethan stared at the pad as if it might catch fire. No, yes, I respectfully decline. Not an option. I disrespectfully decline. Still not an option. Ethan rubbed his face. Do you remember the last time I had to work with an alien delegation? Yes, and it was a disaster, Rave said cheerfully, which is why we need you to do slightly less terribly this time. Ethan groaned. Look, I'm great with biology. I like biology. Give me alien microbes, bizarre fungi, sentient plants that argue over photosynthesis. Great, but you want me to work with the Nixar? They're like walking riddles with better posture. Rave clapped him on the shoulder. I believe in you. You don't. I believe in the complete lack of other available personnel. Ethan sighed dramatically but picked up the data pad. The universe, it seemed, had a personal vendetta against him. The Nari were too quiet. That was Ethan's first impression when he entered the diplomatic chamber. Three of them stood in the center, their forms humanoid, yet eerily still, their long ears twitching as though picking up frequencies beyond human perception, their eyes silver blue, reflective, barely blinked. And then there was her Sela. She stood apart from the others, her posture regal but effortless, as if gravity itself had decided she should be the exception to its rules. Her hair, a deep midnight color, was bound in a way that accentuated the sharp angles of her face. Her long ears subtly shifting as she observed him. Ethan cleared his throat. Hi. The Nari blinked in perfect unison. Okay, weird. He tried again. I'm Dr. Ethan Voss. I'll be your xenobiology liaison, which basically means I get to make sure nobody accidentally poisons anyone else with alien food or says something that starts an intergalactic war. No pressure. Sela tilted her head. I've reviewed your records. Ethan blinked. You have? Yes. A pause. Your previous diplomatic assignments resulted in 3 apologies, 2 reparations, and 1 mysterious disappearance of a delegation member. Ethan frowned. That last one wasn't my fault. He got lost in an air duct trying to follow a scent he described as intriguing but threatening. Sela regarded him in silence, then unexpectedly her lips curved. Not quite a smile, but not a smile either. Interesting. One of the other Nairi, a male whose presence radiated all the warmth of deep space, interjected, we find humor to be inefficient. Ethan shrugged. Humor is the only thing keeping the human species from self imploding. Seal's silver blue gaze lingered on him, intriguing. Ethan wasn't sure if or how he should take that. His first real assignment with the Nexar was dinner, which was frankly a terrible idea. The Odysseus had prepared a diplomatic meal, human cuisine on one side, Nairi cuisine on the other, separated like 2 rival kingdoms at war. Ethan sat beside Sela, watching as she examined the human food with the same level of suspicion one might reserve for an unidentified life form oozing on a lab bench. He pointed at a plate of pasta. That's spaghetti. Sela studied it. It is writhing. It's cooked wheat. Yes. She lifted a single strand between 2 elegant fingers. It has the texture of a larval organism. Ethan picked up his fork and twirled his spaghetti, unimpressed. Delicious larval organism. C's long ears twitched. Then, without hesitation, she reached for a Nari dish that looked like a collection of translucent pulsing spheres. Scooped one up between her fingers and, without breaking eye contact, bit down on it. The sphere crunched. Something inside it shifted. Ethan's stomach flipped. Sela swallowed delicious larval organism. Ethan set his fork down. Okay, that's terrifying. Sela took another. Your reaction suggests I have succeeded. Ethan exhaled. All right, first diplomatic mission and utter failure. Let's call it a night. Over the next few days, Ethan found Himself in more conversations with Sela than he had anticipated, she was unsettlingly observant, often answering questions before he even finished asking them. She seemed fascinated by human concepts of choice, emotion, and time, as if trying to untangle a puzzle whose solution had no fixed state one evening. As they walked through the ship's observation deck, Sela posed a question. Human romance, she said. It is impermanent, Ethan snorted. That's an understatement. Sela considered this. You find this acceptable? Well, so he said. It's kind of the whole point. People get to choose who they love, and sometimes they change their minds. Sela was silent for a long moment, then softly, almost as if she's speaking more to herself than to him, she said, fascinating for us. There's no choice, only recognition. Ethan frowned. Recognition? Sela turned to him for the first time. There was something behind her silver blue eyes that he could almost call uncertainty, and then she smiled, a slow, knowing thing. Perhaps she murmured, you will understand soon enough. Ethan did not like the sound of that, not one bit. The hum of the Odysseus was as steady as Ethan Voss's skepticism, a familiar presence that underscored everything in deep space, the quiet thrum of the ship's engines, the distant murmur of crew conversations, the occasional alarming clang that probably wasn't a structural failure. Probably Ethan sat in the ship's laboratory pretending to be engrossed in his work, while actually keeping half an eye on the data pad, displaying the latest Nari reports. He didn't need to check them. Nari efficiency, InSur, assured their reports were obsessively thorough down to the molecular composition of the air in their quarters, but he found himself reading them anyway, or rather reading between the lines of one particular Nixari's reports. Say Allah, he wasn't sure why he was fixated on her. Was it the way she never seemed surprised by anything, the eerie precision with which she navigated social interactions like a scientist studying a culture from behind glass, the fact that despite her flawless composure there were fleeting moments, too quick, too subtle, when she hesitated? Or was it that night in the observation deck when she had looked at him and said in that unnervingly calm voice, perhaps you will understand soon enough? Yeah, that was probably it. He sighed and tossed the data pad onto the table, running a hand through his hair. He needed a break, maybe a drink or a long nap in an escape pod aimed at a planet with zero diplomatic responsibility. Instead, his calm chimed Dr. Voss. He closed his eyes. Please tell me this is good news. Commander Rave has assigned you to the Nari delegation's cultural briefing. Ethan opened his eyes and groaned. Great, more opportunities to offend an entire species. Your attendance is mandatory. Of course it is, he muttered, standing and grabbing his jacket. Fine. Let's go learn how not to get vaporized over bad dinner conversation. The briefing was held in Conference Room Beta, which despite its official title was widely known among the crew as the place where diplomacy goes to die. Ethan entered to find the usual assortment of humans and Nixari arranged with all the warmth of a high-stakes chess match. Sela was already there, standing near the front, poised with the same infuriating stillness that made it impossible to tell if she was bored, intrigued, or plotting something. Her long ears twitched slightly when she noticed him. Dr. Voss, she greeted Sela. He returned, taking a seat here to teach us fragile humans the mysteries of Nyari etiquette. She tilted her head. Your fragility is self-imposed. Ethan blinked. Did you just call humans emotionally weak in a diplomatic setting? Say Allah's expression was unreadable. Number, but if I did, would it be incorrect? There was a beat of silence, then to Ethan's genuine horror, Commander Rave, who had just entered the room, laughed. Sela turned to him, looking faintly pleased. Oh, I like her, Rave said, clapping Ethan on the back as he took a seat. Finally, someone who speaks the truth around here. Ethan scowled. Fantastic, so glad to be here. Sela watched him, her silver blue gaze sharp with what could almost be amusement. Let us begin, she said. The Nari briefing was as excruciatingly thorough as expected. It covered everything from acceptable forms of greeting. Handshakes were tolerated, but considered inefficient, to cultural taboos. Interrupting a Nikari mid thought was seen as an act of severe impatience, which for them was borderline offensive. Ethan managed to pay attention mostly, but as Sela spoke, his mind drifted back to their earlier conversation about Nyari love recognition. That's what she had called it. For them, love wasn't a choice, it was a state of being, an immutable bond. Once formed that was unnerving, the idea that emotions could be anything other than fleeting, that they could be fixed, eternal. It went against everything Ethan understood about human relationships. He frowned and leaned forward. I have a question. The room turned toward him. Sela regarded him with quiet expectation. He hesitated, then said, Nairi relationships, if they're permanent, what happens if one side changes their mind? A long pause, then Sela blinked slowly. That is not possible. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Not possible. You're saying no Nairi has ever regretted their bond? Sayala considered. Regret implies dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction implies incompleteness. Recognition is complete. It is not something one can unmake. Ethan folded his arms. Sounds more like an obligation than love. A few of the Nairi murmured among themselves. Sela, however, remained perfectly composed. You misunderstand. It is not duty, it is certainty. Ethan scoffed. Humans don't do certainty. We second-guess everything. It's part of our charm. Say's long ears twitched. It is inefficient. Welcome to the human experience, Ethan muttered after the briefing as the delegates filed out. Ethan found himself lingering. So did Sela. You are troubled, she observed. Ethan sighed. Just trying to wrap my head around your perspective. Sela studied him for a long moment, then softly she said, and yet you do not dismiss it outright. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I guess I just don't like the idea of something being irreversible. Sela took a step closer, her presence strangely grounding. That is because to you love is a risk, for us it is an inevitability. Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh that sounds terrifying. Sela tilted her head. Perhaps, but it is also peaceful. Ethan wasn't sure what to do with that, so instead he did what he did best, deflect. All right, he said, stretching. One last question before I go. Totally unrelated, by the way. Sela raised an eyebrow. If you had to choose between eating spaghetti or one of those crunchy Nairi spheres of horror, which would it be? A long pause, then Sayala did something completely unexpected. She smiled, a real smile, small, fleeting, but unmistakably their spaghetti, she admitted. Ethan grinned. See, you're already learning the best parts of humanity. Sela regarded him for a moment longer, then in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she said, perhaps, and for the first time since he had met her, Ethan had the strangest, most unsettling thought. Maybe he was the one who needed to learn. The Odysseus drifted in the silent abyss, a speck of stubborn metal in an ocean of nothing. Inside its corridors hummed with the quiet, persistent sounds of life, air filtration, distant conversations, the occasional thud of something falling in the engineering bay that was immediately followed by a string of profanity. Ethan Voss sat in the mess hall staring at his food tray as though deep contemplation would somehow make its contents more appetizing. Are you attempting to consume it, or have you entered some form of human meditative state? Ethan looked up to see Sela standing beside his table, head slightly tilted, her long ears shifting just enough to suggest amusement. It's called dreading my life choices, Ethan muttered, poking at the mystery protein with his fork. Would you like to join me? Sela considered the invitation for precisely 2 seconds before sitting across from him. Ethan blinked. He hadn't actually expected her to accept. Nairi do not dread life choices, she said smoothly, folding her hands in her lap. Of course you don't. Ethan sighed. Your whole species runs on absolute certainty. Meanwhile humans can barely decide what to have for breakfast without an existential crisis. Sela observed him for a moment. Would you like me to select your meal for you? Ethan barked a laugh. I'm good, thanks. Pretty sure the only thing worse than this food would be. He trailed off, remembering the Nar's crunchy pulsing spheres of horror. Seal's lips twitched. Your silence confirms your fear. I'm not afraid, Ethan lied. I just have a healthy respect for the fact that your people think delicious and threatening should belong on the same menu. Sela gave a slow, thoughtful nod of valid observation. Ethan frowned. Wait, really? You're actually agreeing with me? Sela rested her chin lightly on her hand. You assume I am incapable of acknowledging external perspectives. Well, yeah, Ethan admitted. You kind of give off I have already analyzed all possible outcomes and concluded that I am correct. Energy. Sela blinked at him, then to his absolute shock laughed. Ethan stared at her. It wasn't a loud laugh, nor was it particularly long, but it was real, and it hit him in a way he wasn't prepared for. It was the first time he'd heard her break that unshakable Nairi poise. A pause stretched between them, and Ethan Cleared his throat. All right, I need to change the subject before I start thinking this is some elaborate trap. Why exactly are you sitting here with me instead of doing important Nairi things? Sela composed herself, her expression shifting back into that unreadable stillness. Because I wish to speak with you. Ethan raised an eyebrow. About Seal's gaze flickered silver blue and sharp. I've been studying human relationships. Ethan froze mid of his drink. Oh, why? Sela tilted her head. You have expressed confusion regarding Nairi bonds. I wish to compare. Ethan set his cup down carefully. Compare like scientifically. Sela nodded once. Correct. Oh great, Ethan muttered, so I'm a test subject now. She considered perhaps an anomaly would be a more accurate term. Ethan groaned. Fantastic, that makes me feel so much better. Sela ignored his sarcasm. Humans seem to value the process of courtship, the gradual selection of a partner. Ethan squinted at her. Please tell me this isn't about to turn into an awkward Nairi version of a dating survey. Sela blinked. Would you find that awkward? Ethan choked on air. Sela watched him calmly as though waiting for a scientifically valid response. Ethan waved a hand. We are not doing this over dinner. Seal's ears twitched. Very well, a different setting. Then he dropped his head into his hands. That's not. Never mind. Moving on. Sela leaned forward slightly. Humans engage in dating. You sample interactions with multiple potential mates before selecting one. Correct. Ethan gave her a wary look. That is a wildly clinical way to describe it, but yes. Sela nodded. Nairi do not engage in such uncertainty. When we encounter the one we are meant to bond with, it is final. Ethan exhaled. Yeah, you mentioned that before and it still sounds terrifying. Sela studied him for a moment before asking why. Ethan shifted in his seat. Because humans change. We grow sometimes in ways we don't expect. What if you wake up one day and realize you don't actually love the person you bonded with? Seal's gaze remained steady. That does not happen. Ethan shook his head. That doesn't make sense. What if? Sela leaned in just enough that her presence filled the space between them and Ethan's breath hitched. For us, she said softly, love is not something we fall into. It is something we recognize. It is immediate. It is permanent. Ethan swallowed. You're saying there's no process, no gradual understanding? Sela shook her head. The moment we see them, we know. Ethan felt a strange, unsettled shiver crawl up his spine. He tried to shake it off, forcing a light tone. Well, that sounds efficient. At least. C's eyes held his for a long moment before she said very quietly, it is also absolute. Ethan's heart did something weird and entirely unhelpful. In his chest, he cleared his throat. All right, well, on that mildly unsettling note, I think I'm going to go process existence for a bit. Sela gave him a slight nod. As you wish. Ethan stood and turned to leave, but then hesitated. Hey, Sela, he asked over his shoulder. She raised an eyebrow. If you ever had to guess, which I know isn't really a Nairi thing, what kind of person do you think you'd end up recognizing? C's gaze held his. I do not need to guess, she said simply. Ethan stared at her. Something in her tone, the certainty, the quiet weight of it, made his stomach flip, and then she stood, brushed past him with effortless grace, and left the mess hall without another word. Ethan sat back down with a thought. His food was cold, not that he could eat it anyway. The audio through the vast indifferent dark of space. Somewhere in the depths of the ship something metallic clanged in a way that definitely wasn't normal, followed by a distant voice shouting, it's fine. Probably. Ethan Voss sighed. That was not a reassuring choice of words, but it was background noise now, like everything else aboard the ship. The gentle hum of the engines, the ever-present flicker of artificial lighting, the smell of synthetic coffee that somehow managed to be both too bitter and completely flavorless at the same time. And of course the other thing he couldn't seem to outsay. Allah. Ethan didn't want to keep replaying their last conversation, but his brain was absolutely committed to doing so anyway. I do not need to guess. That sentence had lodged itself into his thoughts like a splinter, impossible to ignore. She had said it with that same quiet certainty, the kind that suggested there was nothing hypothetical about it, which was ridiculous, right? Absolutely, probably. Ethan shook his head and tried to focus on the present. He had actual work to do, namely assisting in a routine planetary survey, which was why he was currently standing in the ship's main docking bay, adjusting the straps of his equipment harness while trying very hard to act Like everything was fine, the survey team was prepping their gear, chatting about atmospheric readings, potential landing sites, and not about how Ethan had suddenly developed an existential crisis over an alien woman's choice of words. Speaking of which, Sela arrived exactly on time because of course she did. She moved with that same effortless grace, her long ears twitching slightly as she took in the gathered crew. She was wearing the standard issue off-world exploration suit tailored to Nairi physiology, though she made it look significantly more dignified than Ethan ever had she stopped beside him. Dr. Voss. Ethan cleared his throat. Sela, a pause. Ethan fought the urge to fidget. Sela naturally stood perfectly still in that unnerving way only a Nixari could. So Ethan said, mostly to fill the silence, excited to be walking around on some totally unremarkable, probably boring moon. Sela arched a delicate eyebrow. Excitement is not a factor, the mission is necessary. Ethan sighed dramatically. You got to work on your enthusiasm, Sela. She considered this. You are suggesting I manufacture promotional investment for something that does not require it. That's called having a good time, Ethan said. Sela gave him a look which he was pretty sure translated to this is why humans are inefficient. Before she could say anything else, Commander Rave clapped his hands. All right, team, we're making a quick atmospheric sweep, then a surface excursion for mineral sampling. Keep it tight, professional, and incident-free. Ethan exchanged a glance with one of the other human scientists. Sounds like a setup for something to definitely go wrong. Absolutely, she muttered. Back. The planetary descent was smooth, which should have been Ethan's first clue that something was about to get weird. The moon itself was about as thrilling as a blank sheet of paper, flat plains of pale rock, an atmosphere that was technically breathable but still required light filtration, and absolutely nothing interesting at first glance. The team split into their assigned groups. Ethan naturally was paired with Sela. He told himself it was fine, normal, no big deal, so he said as they walked across the rocky terrain, scanners humming in their hands, you ever just stop and appreciate the little things? Like the quiet beauty of an untouched world. Sela glanced at him. Are you attempting to romanticize dull rock formations? Ethan scoffed. I'm being poetic. Sela nodded. Are an inefficient use of thought. You're impossible, Ethan muttered, shaking his head. They continued scanning, moving in practice silence until Ethan's device beeped. He frowned and tapped the screen. Sela turned to him. You have detected something? Yeah, but the readings don't make sense. Sela stepped closer. Explain. Ethan turned the screen toward her. Energy signature not natural. Sela's expression barely changed, but he saw the flicker of real interest in her eyes. A structure. Ethan exhaled. Only one way to find out. Find. As it turned out, the weirdness was only just beginning. Following the signal led them to a cave entrance nestled between two unremarkable cliffs. The energy readings were stronger here. Pulsing faintly. Ethan glanced at Sela. Thoughts? She studied the entrance. It is anomalous. Ethan sighed. That's Nairi, for I have no idea what this is, isn't it? Sela's ears twitched. It is a calculated uncertainty. Ethan groaned. Great love. That for us. They stepped inside. The interior was unnatural, smooth, carved walls, metallic traces embedded in the stone. It wasn't just a cave, it was constructed. Ethan let out a low whistle. Looks like someone's been here before. Sela moved carefully, fingers brushing against a faintly glowing panel on the wall. Tech and technology, she confirmed. Old tech, Ethan muttered, and not human. Before Sela could respond, the glow intensified. A deep low hum resonated through the chamber. Ethan tensed. Sela, she was already moving, fingers dancing over her scanner. The system is reactivating. Oh. Good, Ethan muttered. Love accidentally waking up ancient alien artifacts. Sela tilted her head. It is preferable to doing so intentionally. The walls lit up, symbols flickering across the surface. Then, without warning, a section of the floor beneath them shifted, and before Ethan could react, the ground gave out beneath them. For a split second, there was only free fall, a rush of air, a surge of weightlessness, and then impact. Ethan groaned, blinking up at a ceiling that definitely hadn't been there a second ago. He sat up, checking himself for injuries beside him. Sela was already upright, looking irritatingly composed for someone who had just fallen. Who knows how far? Ethan exhaled. Okay, let's take a moment to appreciate the fact that we are not dead. Sela nodded. Noted. Ethan rubbed his face. Now where the hell are we? Sela glanced around the chamber. Larger, more structured than the one above the walls, still glowed with alien script. Her gaze flickered back to him. "We are," she said calmly. "Somewhere we were not meant to be." Ethan sighed. "That's Nick." "Sorry for we're screwed, isn't it?" Sela considered. "Possibly." Ethan took a deep breath, staring at the glowing alien script on the walls. "All right," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "So to recap, we fell through a hole in the ground, landed in a very old, very notum structure, and now we're standing in a room that may or may not be a Tuma control center or a really fancy janitor's closet." Seal's ears twitched slightly as she scanned the walls. "The architecture suggests this space was intentionally sealed, right?" Ethan said. "So we weren't supposed to be here." Sela nodded. Ethan exhaled, placing his hands on his hips. "Okay, new question. How not supposed to be here are we? Talking like museum after closing hours, not supposed to be here, or we just woke up an ancient evil and it's about to monologue, not supposed to be here?" Sela tapped a control on her wrist device. Frowning slightly at the readings, there is a faint energy source coming from deeper within the structure. It has increased in intensity since our arrival. Ethan blinked. "That sounds a lot like option 2. Sela turned toward the only visible passage leading out of the chamber. "There is more beyond this room." Ethan let out a long breath. "Of course there is." With no immediate way back to the surface, the only viable plan was to explore. Ethan hated that the only viable plan was to explore the corridor stretched ahead of them, illuminated by the faint glow of embedded light sources in the walls. The air was thin but breathable, carrying a metallic scent that Ethan didn't particularly like, so he said, trying to keep things casual as they walked, "Hypothetically, if this place turns out to be some kind of ancient death trap, do you have a plan?" Sela kept her eyes on her scanner. "Avoid the death traps." Ethan huffed a laugh. "Wow, revolutionary strategy. You should write that down." Sela glanced at him. "Would it ease your anxiety if I listed specific contingency protocols?" Ethan shrugged. "Depends. Do any of those protocols involve not dying horribly?" "Yes." "Then yes, absolutely." Love that they continued deeper into the structure, passing by intricate carvings on the walls, flowing patterned symbols that shifted slightly when viewed from different angles. "These markings," Sela murmured, brushing her fingers lightly over the surface, "they resemble Nixar Prival scripts." Ethan frowned. "Wait, your people have ancient underground structures on moons light years away from Nari space. That is an incorrect assumption. I am stating that the style of these symbols is similar to archaic Nari script, not that this was built by my species." Ethan gave her a skeptical look. "So you're telling me someone completely unrelated just happened to use the same aesthetic choices as your ancient ancestors?" Sela tilted her head. "Convergent development of artistic expression is not impossible." "Possible." Ethan groaned. "Great, we discovered the intergalactic hipster phase of an unknown civilization." Before Sela could reply, the corridor suddenly opened into a massive chamber. Ethan stopped in his tracks, tilting his head back to take it all in. The room was enormous, lined with towering pillars stretching up into the gloom above. Strange conduits ran along the walls, glowing faintly with the same pulsating energy they had detected earlier, and at the center of it all, a structure, not just any structure, a machine. It stood at least 20 ft tall, sleek and dark, with intricate mechanisms embedded into its surface. Humming lines of energy pulsed along its body, feeding into the walls around them. Ethan let out a slow whistle. "Well, that is definitely not a janitor's closet." Sela approached, carefully scanning the device. "This system is operational." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me this thing still works after who knows how long of sitting underground?" "Yes." Sela studied the readings. "It is in standby mode. Our arrival appears to have triggered a low-level activation." Ethan groaned. "So we woke it up, correct?" "Fantastic. That always ends well in history." Sela reached out toward the control panel. Ethan's eyes widened. Whoa. Whoa, hold up. What if touching that thing sets off, I don't know, an alien countdown sequence?" Sela glanced at him. "Then we will have a countdown." Ethan stared at her. "That is the worst possible answer to that question." Despite his protest, Sela lightly pressed her fingers against the glowing surface of the panel. The effect was immediate. The entire structure shuddered. A deep mechanical hum, reverberating through the walls. Symbols flickered to life across the control panel, shifting in response to her touch. Then a voice, not a human Voice not a Nixer voice, something old, something not meant to be heard. Ethan did not like it. The words were garbled, layered, impossible to understand, but they carried weight, meaning a presence that should not have been there. Seals eyes narrowed. It as a message. Yeah, Ethan muttered it, saying, "Congratulations, you're about to die in an ancient alien ruin," said Sela, ignored him, adjusting her scanner. It is ATT tempting translation as they watched the symbols. On the panel shifted, words forming in a language they could understand. This vessel is sealed. The contract is unbroken. The price is paid. Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. That is not a normal welcome message. Sela studied the words. Number it is not before either of them could process it further. A new sound filled the chamber, a deep, deep rhythmic thurring, something moving. Something waking up. Ethan slowly turned toward the machine. Okay, he whispered. I think this is the part where we run. Sela was already backing away. Agreed. The ground trembled beneath them, the conduits flared brighter, the entire room came alive. Ethan grabbed Seal's arm. Time to go right now. They ran behind them. The machine stirred. Ethan had always considered himself a pretty fast runner when properly motivated, like when being chased by something big, ancient, and probably very bad. Right now, motivation levels were at an all-time high. His boots slammed against the metallic floor as he sprinted alongside SC Allahu. Despite her longer stride and eerily graceful movements, seemed just as eager to put as much distance as possible between them and whatever had just woken up behind them. The machine, if it was even a machine, was shaking itself to life. Pulsing lights ran up its towering frame, and with each pulse the chamber walls seemed to respond, shifting, reconfiguring in ways Ethan didn't particularly like. How do we leave? He gasped as they rounded a corner into another passage. Sela glanced at her scanner, then at the shifting architecture around them. That is currently unknown. Ethan groaned. That is not the answer I wanted. They reached a work in the corridor. One path led into darkness, the other was bathed in an eerie blue glow from what looked like a rising energy field. Neither option inspired confidence. Kala stopped just long enough to assess the readings. The right passage contains an unstable containment field. We will be vaporized if we attempt to pass. Ethan immediately veered left. Dark tunnel it is. They plunged into the shadows, their only illumination coming from C's wrist scanner and the occasional flicker of bioluminescent glyphs embedded in the walls. The hum of the machine behind them grew louder, closer, so Ethan huffed between breaths. Worst case scenario. C's voice remained maddeningly calm. The structure is adapting to our presence. The entity inside is mobilizing. If we do not locate an exit soon, we may be eternally trapped in a sentient alien tomb. I get it, Ethan muttered. Can we focus on the part where we don't end up as historical footnotes? Sayal's ears twitched. You assume history will remember us, Ethan groaned. Oh, fantastic jokes and existential dread, that's what I needed right now. The corridor eventually opened into another vast chamber, and for one brief fleeting moment Ethan dared to hope they'd found a way out. That hope died instantly. At the center of the room stood a structure that looked like a throne. No, not a throne, a command seat. Sleek, metallic, humming with energy, and standing directly beside it was a figure. Not a machine, not entirely. It was humanoid in shape, but wrong in execution. Too tall, its limbs elongated and segmented like a construct, assembled from different blueprints. Its face, if it was a face, was smooth, featureless save for faint ridges that suggested eyes. As Ethan and Sela entered, the figure tilted its head, an early organic movement for something so unnatural. Ethan froze. Sela, he whispered, why do I feel like we've just crashed a very, very old meeting? Seal's voice was low, cautious. Because we have. The figure took a step forward, its form shimmered slightly as if it wasn't entirely anchored to reality. When it spoke, the voice was layered like multiple tones trying to exist at once. You have come to break the contract. Ethan took an instinctive step backward. Okay, that's not ominous at all. Sela remained still, her expression unreadable. We do not seek to break anything. The figure exhaled a sound that shouldn't have been possible, and the walls around them pulsed in time with its breath. The contract is eternal. The debt remains unpaid. The cycle is unbroken. Ethan leaned slightly towards Sela. Does that make sense to you? Sela didn't look away from the figure. Yes, and That is unfortunate. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Explain. After we survived this, please, the figure extended a hand. And suddenly the wall shifted again, corridors twisting, doorways closing. Ethan swore under his breath, I really don't like that it can rearrange the building just by existing. Sela was already moving her scanner, beeping rapidly as she pinpointed a possible escape route. We need to reach the lower level. There may be a secondary access point. Ethan didn't ask how she knew that. He just ran. The figure didn't chase them, not physically, but with every step the environment continued to change, as if it was thinking ahead of them, predicting their movements. Doors slammed shut. Passages rerouted. The whole place was a trap in motion, and then a passage to the side, smaller, unaccounted for by the shifting architecture. Sela grabbed Ethan's arm and yanked him inside just before the corridor they'd been running down vanished entirely, swallowed by a solid wall. For a moment neither of them spoke, catching their breath in the dimly lit space. Ethan finally let out a strain chuckle. You know, for a second there I thought we were goners. Say simply exhaled. So did I. Ethan blinked. Wait, you thought we were going to die? Sela gave him a look. Statistical probability was not in our favor. Ethan groaned. I feel so reassured. They followed the narrow passage downward, the air growing heavier, filled with an almost tangible pressure. Like they were stepping into something older than thought itself. Sela's scanner finally gave a confirmation beep. There is an access point ahead. It may lead outside. Ethan could have kissed her if you know they weren't currently fleeing from an ancient entity that could manipulate space. They reached a door, a real solid unmoving door engraved with symbols that pulsed softly. Sela pressed her hand against the control panel. The symbols flickered, hesitated, then slowly the door opened. Beyond it was something Ethan hadn't dared to hope for. Well, not exactly open sky, it was a cavern leading out, but at this point he'd take anything that wasn't an endless shifting labyrinth. Ethan exhaled in relief. I could cry right now. Sela's ears twitched. You should reserve your relief until we confirm full escape. Ethan sighed. Of course, because it's never that easy. Behind them the structure rumbled. The entity wasn't letting them go that easily. The sky stretched above them, a vast endless canvas of swirling violet and fractured gold. Ethan had never seen anything quite like it. If he weren't currently running for his life, he might have taken a moment to appreciate the alien beauty of it all, but that would have to wait. Behind them the ancient structure groaned, a sound like metal tearing through time itself. The very walls of the monolithic ruin trembled as though awakening from an impossible dream, shifting and reforming like a living thing resisting its own destruction. And then it spoke. The contract is eternal. Ethan didn't stop running. Yeah, well, so was my last gym membership, and I still found a way out of that. Sela shot him a look as she sprinted beside him, her long ears twitching. This is not the time for humor, not the time for contracts either. Ethan huffed. Just keep moving. The alien woman didn't argue. She simply pressed forward, her movement swift and precise, her scanner pulsing with a rhythmic urgency. The rocky terrain beneath them sloped downward, leading toward a cluster of jagged formations that resembled frozen waves of black stone. Somewhere beyond them, Sela had assured him, was their escape route if they could reach it. The air itself crackled as the entity's presence surged outward, shifting the environment like a puzzle, rearranging itself. Path, ways, twisted rocks split apart. A deep resonant hum filled the air, a frequency that made Ethan's bones vibrate in ways he really didn't appreciate. Sela suddenly grabbed his arm, yanking him to the side, just as a massive archway of light erupted from the ground, cutting off their previous route. Ethan stumbled, but kept his footing, barely avoiding becoming one with interdimensional architecture. Close, he wheezed. Sela didn't spare him a glance. Closer than I prefer. Yeah, well, same. They pressed on, navigating the shifting labyrinth as it fought to keep them trapped, and then the exit, a shimmering fracture in the air itself, barely stable, pulsing with an energy that looked both inviting and terrifying. Sela's scanner beeped in confirmation. This is it, she said. Ethan eyed the unstable gateway. Any chance this leads to a nice beach planet? Say all is expression remained neutral, statistically improbable. Yeah, figured. Behind them the entity manifested fully, a towering luminous form no longer confined to the structure. It loomed over them, shifting between solid and incorporeal, its voice reverberating through the very fabric of space. The Bond cannot be severed. Sela turned to face it, her voice calm but firm. No bond is eternal when built on. For the entity paused, as though the concept itself was alien to it. Ethan took the opportunity to grab Seal's wrist. Love the philosophical debate, but can we go? Now the entity lunged, not physically, but in a way that bent the world around them. They dove through the fracture. For a long moment there was nothing but weightlessness, a sensation like falling without gravity, sinking without water. Ethan felt stretched, pulled, and then reality snapped back into place. They tumbled onto solid ground beneath an open sky, a different sky, a normal one, if any alien sky could be called normal. Ethan groaned, rolling onto his back. I swear, if we just landed in another haunted ruin, I'm quitting space travel forever. Sela was already upright, scanning their surroundings. The fractured gateway behind them flickered, then collapsed in on itself, with a final whisper of energy sealing them off from whatever they had escaped. Ethan exhaled, staring up at the sky. We made it. Sela glanced at him. Yes, we did, for the first time since they met. Ethan saw something soft in her expression, relief. A moment passed, then another, then so. Ethan said, propping himself up on his elbows, was that the weirdest first date you've ever had, or do you get a lot of eternal contract situations? Sela blinked. That was not a date. Hey, Ethan shrugged. There was running danger and an existential threat. I think that qualifies. She tilted her head. Human courtship rituals confuse me. They confuse everyone. Ethan admitted. Another pause, the distant sound of wind brushing over alien rock. Then Sela spoke again, her tone quieter. You asked once if my kind feel love as humans do. Ethan's breath caught slightly, but he forced a casual tone. Yeah, you said it's different. She nodded. For us, love is not merely an emotion, it is a connection, permanent binding. She hesitated, her long ears twitching slightly. Yet I find myself drawn to your chaos, your defiance of inevitability, your insistence on humor. In the face of oblivion, Ethan gave a crooked smile. Yeah, well, if I'm G to die, I want to at least get a last laugh in. Sela exhaled, almost a laugh of her own. Ethan sat up fully. So what now? We just pretend none of this happened, go our separate ways. Sela studied him for a long moment, then slowly she shook her head. No, she said, we do not. Ethan felt something shift inside him, something weighty, something real. He grinned, trying to shake off the sudden gravity of the moment. Well, in that case, I hope your people don't mind me tagging along for a while. I have so many questions about your whole eternal connection thing. Ala's lips curve slightly. Then I shall do my best to answer them. They stood together under an alien sky, two survivors of something neither fully understood. Whatever happened next, Ethan knew one thing for certain: he wasn't running alone anymore. The end.